It's another week, and wouldn't you know it, it's a loaded show here on Squared Circle Radio. We appreciate you hanging out with us. If it is your first time, welcome in. We appreciate your company. We appreciate you making us your one-stop shop for everything wrestling this week. And if you're a returning viewer, we appreciate you being with us as always. Make sure you hit that like button on the YouTube video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not. Follow us on whatever podcast platform that you are listening on. That is my brother from another mother, the whole podcasting show, Jared Justice. My name is Chris Belcher. Again, we appreciate you so much being with us. Jared, it is a loaded week in wrestling, but man, here lately, when isn't it a loaded week in the world of wrestling, right?
I love it, dude. I love it that I'm back to the point where I look forward to Monday nights to watch wrestling, not to watch some kiddie show that makes no friggin' sense be put on every Monday night, but a wrestling show. And we can call it that. We can call it wrestling, not sports entertainment or whatever.
Yeah, Sam Roberts, I think, even made the point on his podcast today. He was like, I still feel weird saying wrestling, but I'm glad I'm able to say wrestling now. Jared's feeling a little spicy tonight. I like this. Let's get going. I love it. It's a loaded show, man. But before we get into the content this week, shout out to OVW, Ohio Valley Wrestling, for putting on a pay-per-view in our hometown of Pikeville, Kentucky over the weekend. Jared, they drew the largest crowd they have drawn in quite some time, according to part owner Matt Jones on Twitter. Man, it looked like a killer show. They had a cage match and the whole 9 yards, and it looks like that they're probably coming back to Eastern Kentucky with that turnout.
I hope so, man. I actually had tickets that were given to me and actually on the floor, but I did not get to make it because my work schedule is insane right now. I'm kind of making a transition from one shift to another, so I didn't get to make it, but I wanted so bad to go and look that big 7-foot bitch right in the eyes and say, now, do you remember whenever that you made fun of Pikeville, Kentucky? And right back here you are now. So what do you have to say about that?
Oh, that's hilarious. Of course, you're referring to Kevin Nash and some of the comments that he has made about Pikeville, Kentucky. But nonetheless, hey, he's got to make a buck now, and you can make a buck in Pikeville, Kentucky when you make an appearance, right? But shout out to those guys at OVW running shows. And if you're unfamiliar with OVW, go check out the documentary series called Wrestlers on Netflix. It's like a 5 to 6 part behind the scenes look at OVW. It's run by legend Al Snow, and he has some other partners. It used to be the developmental for WWE, but now they run on their own, and they run some good stuff. I've met a lot of their wrestlers and worked with them, and so it's a good product. Go check it out if you're not already doing that. Speaking of old school, let's kick it old school, Jared. Let's kick the show off as we look back this week in wrestling history. It was 22 years ago today, Jared, that Eric Bischoff awarded the big gold belt to Triple H. Brock Lesnar took the Undisputed Championship to SmackDown exclusively, and Eric Bischoff brought the big gold out of the archives and he gave it to Triple H, awarding him the title, making him the World Heavyweight Champion on Monday Night Raw. That was in 2002. That, of course, started the Reign of Terror. But, Jared, this conversation is not about Triple H. It's not even about the big gold belt, as much as you know that I love the big gold belt. It's not even about that. This discussion, this point in history, started 2 world championships. Never before in WWE did we have 2 world champions. Of course, WCW came in the prior year. You had the WCW Championship. They created the Undisputed Championship at the end of 2001. Of course, Chris Jericho was the first winner of that. And then that was the world champion. They did the first ever draft that year and split the rosters, and Triple H went back and forth. Hulk Hogan went back and forth on shows, and The Rock went back and forth on shows. That's right. And when Brock Lesnar won the title, I guess Vince woke up and he decided, I don't want him to travel anymore. He's just going to be on one show. We're going to create a world champion. So lots to make about 2 world champions. Where have you fallen with your opinion on Are you okay with 2 world champs? Should there just be one? Let's discuss. What you got?
Overall, I've hated the concept of 2 world champions from the time it began until now. But I will say that with Seth Rollins with the world title and Roman Reigns carrying the Universal title, I did think that for the first time it looked like we actually had 2 champions that were around the same caliber and could actually be world champion at the same time. You know, they're both good enough. My problem is that for so long you had 2 titles, and a lot of times you would have one champion that you're like, okay, that's the man, that's the one right there.
Bingo.
And then you had the other one, and it's kind of they're kind of like the Intercontinental Champion used to be, the workhorse title. So I mean, I felt better about it recently, but I wish they would do away with it and just go back to one world title, one big one.
Yeah, I completely agree, man. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's all about the talent that's on the other side, that's holding that other world title, because it always brought that championship down. You know, we were never, it was never, I guess you put it great when you said one was like the world champion, one was the Intercontinental Champion. You never felt like that second world title lived up to the first. You knew who was the top dog. You just had to look every year at WrestleMania as to who was main eventing. That's how you knew who was top dog. And then everybody else, it was just Daniel Bryan and Sheamus in 18 seconds. And then I think where I'm with you, I'm in the camp of I have hated 2 world titles from the beginning. And even when you have a guy as talented as Seth Rollins, I still hated it. Because as a world champion, there should be one world champion. And
I agree.
Jared, I get that there's probably politics involved, especially when you have Raw and SmackDown on separate networks. So there could be a contingency where USA wants a champion and Fox wants a champion and now Netflix wants a champion and blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on. If that's true or if that's not true, it waters down the product, man. And you look back the day where Ric Flair just went from territory to territory and defended that title that time. Do you think the NWA ever had a glimpse of a thought of, we should create another world title because Ric Flair's not come back for our territory for another 6 months? Do you think that ever happened? No.
See, the one thing I want to throw in here before we get too far down the road was whenever you mentioned that about Brock and you said, well, Vince thought, well, I don't want Brock to be going back and forth, blah, blah, blah. See, I was always under the impression, I don't even know if I read it somewhere. Maybe I just read everything combined at the time it was happening until now, and it gave me the impression that Brock was getting his butt wiped by Vince McMahon, not in any kind of bad situation before anybody goes down that road, but he was getting pampered a little bit, and I think Brock did not want to travel to both shows. He did not want that kind of travel schedule. And so Vince pampered him, just like he always has a record of doing, made another world title. So there we have 2 world champions. Or at least that's why he stuck with it. I'm not sure the timeline there. But
sure.
I was always under the impression Brock didn't want to travel. And so that was kind of the politics that may have been involved.
Yeah, I specifically remember Bruce Pritchard talking about the end of Brock's run, especially that he didn't want to travel around that time. So I can only imagine that in 2002 when he won the championship, he was already, he had Paul Heyman in his ear from the jump. I'm not saying anything good or bad about Paul Heyman. I'm just saying he can have a lot of influence on somebody, on their feelings about one matter or what have you. So I think you could be spot on there. I think it... You know, we've said over and over that it waters down the product. What waters down the product even more is the fact that if they would have started in 2002 with 2 world champions, and in 2024, we have 2 world champions. And if they would have gone those whole 22 years and had 2 world champions, we could buy it. But Jared, how many times did they unify the titles? How many times did they just say, oh, 1 world champion? Daniel Bryan had both world titles, and John Cena had both world titles. And I think The Rock had both world titles at one point. And of course, Roman Reigns had both world titles. So it's like one side or the other, Vince wakes up and does whatever he wants, and then he decides he wants to combine the world titles. Then you get yourself in a situation where Cody Rhodes was at WrestleMania 39, where maybe they weren't ready for Roman to lose the belt, but there wasn't another world title. It just creates two world titles, just creates too many problems.
Yeah, it snowballs and makes one big cluster, you know what.
Yep.
I mean, I just don't like it.
Yeah, I don't either. But that being said, it happened, and if creating another world title was the way to get the big gold belt back into the fold so that we got to see that for several years, I mean, I can be okay with that. We saw Shawn Michaels hold that title. The Undertaker held that title. Randy Orton held that title. Edge held that title. So many guys held that big gold belt. So that was cool to get that back into the fold. Speaking of the big gold belt, that brings me to Kickin It Old School point number 2. And that is a few years earlier than that. I'm talking about 1995, September the 4th. What happened on that day? Jared, Ted Turner opened up his checkbook to Eric Bischoff, and he said, "I give you 2 hours to compete with Vince McMahon in prime time." And boy, did he ever. Monday Nitro was born in 1995 on September the 4th. You're looking at it on your screen on YouTube channel. Sting and Ric Flair on live TV for the first Monday Nitro, and Lex Luger showing up unexpectedly, not telling anybody. Man, what a wild time it was. Man, what do you remember, first of all, about this first Nitro and watching it, and just how it changed your perspective in 1995?
Man, I was just so captivated by like it being in a mall, the Mall of America.
Know. And it never went back.
Yeah, I mean, I wish it would have, but it was just crazy because I remember tuning in and I'm like, what kind of place are they at? And, you know, so immediately, you know, it has your attention and you keep watching and like you can see people just walking by, you know, they're shopping. What in the world's going on over there? You know, there's Hulk Hogan, and off they go. So, I mean, I thought it was a cool setup. It's kind of like the ballroom where ACW goes. What's it called?
Oh, shoot. I know what you're talking about. Hammerstein.
Yeah, Hammerstein Ballroom.
Yep.
It's one of those places that just looks so awesome that I wish, and it's a smaller venue, I guess, and probably they had trouble charging for tickets if they even did for that first Nitro, so that's probably why they didn't go back. But it was just such a cool thing that stands out, just like all the matches I remember seeing and events that happened at the Hammerstein, those stick out in my mind. The same way this Mall of America sticks out in my mind since it was home base for the first Nitro.
Yeah, for sure. And then you had all the Nitros that happened at Disney MGM, and then the Spring Break Nitros.
Spring Break.
Yeah. And then you had the WWF Monday Night Raws that originated in the Manhattan Center. So they did that for a year. So like the first.
Do you remember whenever we would get the little WCW rings and put them on the float in the pool and act like we were having the wrestling event there at Spring Break where you had the water around the ring?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Just those unique venues just stand out, especially in the young, moldable minds that we had, just soaking in everything wrestling. Man, that kind of stuff appeals for sure. So I love this original Monday Nitro. They only had 3 matches. I'll correct myself. I think it was only an hour, maybe not 2 to start with. But they only had 3 matches. It was Jushin Thunder Liger against Flying Brian. It was Sting against Ric Flair, and it was Hulk Hogan against Big Bubba. It was just
Big Bubber.
Big Bubber. It was a wild time. But this would obviously springboard the Monday Night Wars. Now we're seeing action figure lines, the Monday Night War action figures that are coming out. You have the Lex Luger figure that depicts that first appearance, and then, you know, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more of those things coming down the line. But take me through as we got older. So 1995, I was about to turn 7. So I think I was 6 when this Nitro aired. So I'm about to turn 7, and I'm just loving wrestling. It's great to have wrestling on live TV. Now we have to decide if we're going to record Raw and watch Nitro, or we're going to watch Nitro and record Raw. You know, you have all of that debacle. You got to watch the next one the next day after school because you can't stay up, blah, blah, blah. But then the Monday Night Wars happened, and then the infamous 83 weeks where WCW wins, the NWO was running hot, then DX and Austin. What are some of your favorite memories? They don't have to be specific moments that happened on a show, but your memories of the Monday Night Wars and growing up in that era.
Man, it was crazy. I remember at one point I actually had, I would tape on one television with a VCR. I would tape like WCW.
Yeah.
And I might be watching that one. But in another room, I would have the VCR recording Monday Night Raw. And so,
dude, let me stop you right there. I remember coming over to your house. For those of you who don't know, I called Jared, my brother from another mother, because we literally grew up 0.2 of a mile apart on the same road. His mom and my stepdad are siblings, so we were together all the time watching wrestling. I remember coming to your house. And us, like, you would go to one room and I would go to the other. And we would literally shout back and forth as to what was happening. And then we'd switch and do all the things. All right, go ahead.
It's crazy, man, because, I mean, think of how awesome it would be in today's time where you have, like, the picture-in-picture.
Yep.
So we could actually just sit and watch both of them.
Yep.
But instead, we're running from room to room. I'm sure it probably drove my parents nuts. But, I mean, they were good sports. They let the craziness happen. I don't know, man. I remember, of course, the first thing that pops in my head, and I remember Eric Bischoff giving the results of WWF Raw away, and me watching them being like, did he really just tell me what was going to happen before it happened?
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that. But, of course, you had the night whenever they told everybody Mick Foley's going to be winning that world title, and that was when the 83 weeks ceased to be, and it did not become 84. So,
right.
That just sticks out in my head, dude. It was just, you had all these big stars and big angles, and everything just seemed big. I mean, everything meant something. You would go to school the next day. You had your WCW people. You had your WWF people. You had your people like me and you that watched both.
Yeah.
And everybody would be talking and, oh, did you see this? No, I was watching this. Did you see that? No, I was watching that. It was insane, dude. I loved it.
You know, Lex Luger jumped ship on the first Monday Nitro, and then you had a couple other guys. Of course, you had Scott Hall and Kevin Nash coming in a little while later, and you had some big stars that switched brands. But what fascinated me about the Monday Night Wars is the mid-card guys that switched brands, because, like, I'll never forget turning on Monday Nitro, and all of a sudden the British Bulldog just randomly walks out, and I'm like, what? Wait a minute. What is he doing there? And then, like, they would show up, they'd wrestle a couple matches, boom, never to be heard from again. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, what are we doing here? So, like, X-Pac bounced back and forth between shows, and Mr. Perfect showing up on WCW. I'm like, wait a minute. What is this guy doing? So, to me, it wasn't like the big stars. It was the mid-card guys that I was so used to seeing on the other channel that just made me scratch my head. You know what I mean? I could get behind the big stars and be like, oh, this is cool to get to see them here. But the mid-card guys, I'm like, what are we doing?
It's crazy, man, thinking back, because I'll ask you this question, and everybody out there can kind of answer it in their own minds. Why was it that you could have a wrestler, like, we'll just use X-Pac as an example, and it doesn't even fit him necessarily, but you have them on WWF, and you're like, oh, man, that guy's awesome. And, you know, their outfit's different, and they're portrayed this way. And then you would see him on Nitro, and you'd be like, this guy looks like second rate. Like, he's not a big deal. And then they go back to WWF, and they're back to being a big deal again. It had to just be the presentation, the booking, because the crowd at that time, there really wasn't a WCW and a WWF crowd. They intertwined at some point.
Yep.
And so it really makes no sense. You would think that wrestler A that moves over to this side should be just as big as they were when they came from this side. But that wasn't always the case. It's crazy to think back on.
Yeah, man, the creative and the presentation, I think you hit the nail on the head, because if you listen, creative was a cluster backstage at WCW, because you had Kevin Sullivan, God rest his soul, rest in peace. You had Kevin Sullivan writing these stories for these guys. And then Eric Bischoff was supposedly in charge. And then he would say, oh, no, I don't like that. And then he would change it. And then Kevin Nash would walk up and be like, nope, I don't like that. I'm not doing that. I'm changing it. And then Scott Hall would walk up and he would say, oh, I'm booked for that house show. Nope, I'm not showing up. And there were no repercussions for anything. I'll tell you the one guy that popped in my head when you were going through that with X-Pac, and he wasn't a huge star for either company, but I think the presentation part of it and the creative part lines up with this guy perfect, and that's Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett in 1995, he had a huge angle with the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, and the Road Dogg, and the lip syncing thing, and the With My Baby Tonight, and he was portrayed as a top mid-level guy. He had never made it to the main event picture, but he was top mid-level guy. Well, he comes into WCW, and supposedly he's going to be the fourth horseman, and Ric Flair is going to anoint him, and that just didn't really go as everybody thought it would, and the fans weren't very accepting of it, and it was, he was like, well, you're sort of Ric Flair light, and that's the way that booking thought of him, and he never got to that level. Well, then fast forward the next year, he goes back to WWF, and he cuts his hair. He's got Deborah. He brings Deborah with him. He's smashing dudes and chicks over the head with a guitar, and he's having a good housekeeping match with Chyna, and the thing is through the roof. Well, then, Jared, 99, he goes back to WCW, and they immediately put the world title on him. And then Vince Russo shows up, and it all goes downhill. So I think Jeff Jarrett's a great example of, it's literally the same guy. He literally has the same wrestling skills, but the character and the presentation and creative just sent him all over the place.
Yep. I mean, that's exactly what happened with him. I mean, chaos on one side, and then you had the other side, which was almost maybe too far when it goes to being strict.
Sure.
Up until you had like DX and Stone Cold that they just opened up the floodgates for that. But WWF, I mean, they would punish people if you didn't show up at your bookings and so on and so forth. They made you behave for the most part. They at least tried to.
Yep.
So just all that combined, I guess, that kind of answers my question.
It was a wild time, man. The Monday Night Wars were just an absolutely incredible time. The only thing I regret about the Monday Night Wars is I wish I was a little bit older in watching them. Not that I would have been like smartened up or anything, but I wish I wouldn't have looked at it through 8-year-old glasses. You know what I mean? I wish I would have had like 10 or 11-year-old glasses to really appreciate more of what was happening and to really spot, because there's a lot of things that I look back on, I'm like, oh, that was so awesome. And in reality, it was not awesome,
Well, I mean, I was about, how old are you right now?
I'm 35.
35. So I'm almost 5 years older than you. So I actually did have the older glasses on at the time. And I mean, I still didn't appreciate it. Like, I didn't know everything that was going on behind the scenes. There was just so much that I just did not know. I didn't understand.
Yep.
So, but we had the honor and the privilege of looking at it through kid eyes, kid glasses, and it just seeming bigger than life.
Yep.
So,
and you could argue that's why we're fans today, and that's why we have a podcast today, because of the way that we looked at that era. Yep. Oh, man. What a time it was. What a time it was. All right. WWE Bash in Berlin was this past weekend. We're going to get to that in just a second. But before we do that, I tell you guys all the time about Sports Wire Radio. And I tell you need to go listen to it. You need to go check it out. And it's your one-stop shop for everything sports. I'm not going to do that tonight, Jared. What I'm going to do for our listeners is I'm going to have the Reverend Tom Bryce tell you about it. Take a listen.
Looking for all the latest happenings in the world of sports and wrestling? Well, you're in luck because SportsWire Radio has you covered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year. With great shows in the world of sports, such as the Pinstripe Chronicles, hosted by Uncle Tats, Donald Stewart, and Rob Barrows. New York Baseball Talk with Chris Bazaya and Rob Maraska. The Liftoff Jets, also hosted by Chris Bazaya and Sharman Phillip. Neil Villapiano and the Devil's State of Mind. Randy Dillon's Hockey Fan Chat. In the world of wrestling, SportsWire Radio has you covered with Squared Circle Radio, featuring Chris Belcher, Andy York, and Jared Justice. Those sit-down marks with DB, Primo, AJ, and Michael. A work in progress, featuring the Mayor of Canton, Piles, and Glenn Abbott. You can catch all of these great shows and more anytime, anywhere, and any place via the Listen Live button on SportsWireRadio.org, and you can also catch SportsWire Radio anytime on YouTube at SportsWire Radio 6579 to catch all the latest happenings in the world of wrestling. SportsWire Radio has you covered. It's all sports matters and all wrestling matters here on SportsWire Radio. I am your host, the owner of SportsWire Radio, the #1 global radio station, the owner of the Promo Wrestling Federation, and one of the owners of the Pride Wrestling Federation. Your voice, figuratively and literally, where all wrestling matters, the Reverend Tom Bryce.
That's my dude right there. That dude right there. Listen, Tom Bryce and the SportsWire Radio crew, we have got you covered. That is our exclusive partner. So go check out, hit that Listen Live button for all of those great shows, including ours. All those great shows, make sure that you check them out. All right, Jared, Bash in Berlin was this past weekend. What a show it was. Let me go right off the bat here. The European crowd in Berlin, Germany, lived up to all of the other ones that we have seen. It seemed like, man, that the card was pretty predictable. Last week, you and I, gave our predictions for the show, and we were right in line with each other. I think I gave one that was different for the sake of giving one that was different, but we were right on all of them. I'll say this, though, Jared, in watching that show, knowing what the outcome was going to be did not take away from the excitement. I had a blast watching this show. Overall, what did you think?
I loved it. And first, before we move on, I just want to say, anybody in the New York area, if I'm ever up there again and you pick on Tom Bryce, I will smash you, just like how Roman Reigns gets in that ring and smashes everybody. So be good to Tom. Good guy.
That's amazing.
But, man, I love the show. I love the crowd. And it goes back to, it doesn't matter how, maybe a little. It doesn't matter how predictable wrestling is. We just want a good show.
Yep.
We want good to triumph over evil in the end.
Yep.
And, as long as things make sense and we're watching a good story, who cares if it's predictable? I mean, that just means that people are looking at it and saying, okay, well, it makes sense if this happens because next we're going to go here, I hope.
Right.
I mean, you don't want to just swerve people for the sake of a swerve, as they say.
Bro.
If the show makes sense, who cares? It's a good show.
It's a great show. And the crowd, like we said, had a great time. They were invested the whole way through. And, Jared, this pay-per-view, this is going to be a shot, and I'm going to fire it anyway. This pay-per-view was full of great wrestling. There was no high-risk spots. There were no dangerous spots. There wasn't a bunch of false finishes and no sells and this, that, and the other. This show was about wrestling, and it was so good. You had This Is Awesome chance in almost every single match that happened, and Jared, I was so blown away with the fact that there was so much good wrestling in this show.
Yes.
It was wild when it needed to be, but, brother, it was just knockdown, drag-out wrestling when it needed to be.
Well, I mean, Triple H effectively has killed the argument that so many fans had as for why they watched AEW. Me included at one point when AEW first started.
Yep.
I wanted to see good wrestling. Didn't have good stories, but you had good wrestling. The exact opposite on WWE. But with Triple H, running the show, man, they have combined it. We got good stories, good wrestling, and it makes sense.
Yep.
And it's not geared towards 3-year-olds only, as they're sitting there sucking their thumb. watching wrestling, it makes sense to me.
Right.
You know, it's just a good show that everybody can enjoy.
Yeah, I completely agree. We kicked off the show with the undisputed WWE Championship match, Cody Rhodes and Kevin Owens. Man, what about this was Cody Rhodes retaining his championship because Kevin Owens couldn't pull the trigger. He several times, so many openings that Kevin had, and he didn't take them because Cody's his friend. What do you think of that angle of the way they're running with KO right now?
Of course, it irritates me. I like KO.
Yep.
And it irritated me watching the match. It's like, dude, do what you got to do to win. I mean, this man is giving you a shot. He knows what you're capable of, and he still wanted you at your best. And, like, you're kind of pussyfooting out a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I just cannot wait because I think this is all going to culminate with KO turning his back on Cody and beating the snot out of this man.
Well, we saw it happen with Chris Jericho when he turned on Chris Jericho at the Festival of Friendship. He just snapped, and I envision that happening as well. It's like KO said in his promo that he wanted to beat Cody at his best, and he felt like that if he took those cheap shots, Cody wouldn't be at his best. But like you said, man, the world title is on the line. You got to win at all costs. Kevin Owens has not had a singles championship in 7 years in the WWE. 7 years. So that now begs the question. You like KO. I like KO. But will we ever see Kevin Owens get back to that main, I'm not saying world champion, but that main event level? Or will he always just be this great utility player that's going to be used to get guys over?
I don't think he's a utility player really even now. I still think he's one of the top guys, and there's always that in the back of your mind that's telling you KO could win this. The utility players, I feel like, are the ones that you look at and you're like, they're really good, but there ain't nowhere they're coming out of that match the champion. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But to answer your question, I don't think Kevin Owens is ever going to get back to the way he was portrayed by Vince McMahon when he first came in and beat John Cena.
Yep.
The man beat John Cena. And he was an indie wrestler.
He was the Indies. He was the NXT champion at the time. And then you look so many years after that and how Vince wanted to just totally separate NXT from the main roster, and it just wasn't even on the same level. Yet when Kevin Owens debuted in 2014, 15, something like that, he's a champion, and he beats John Cena in his first night in. And then he becomes the Universal Champion and holds that title for 8-9 months or whatever it was. So I hate to do this, and when I say this, you're going to understand why I hate it. I put Kevin Owens and AJ Styles in the same category, in that they're never going to be world champion again. I believe they will never be world champion again. I think Kevin Owens.
AJ would before KO.
Maybe. The reason I say maybe is I feel like Kevin Owens is better off under the Triple H regime, whereas AJ Styles was probably better off under the Vince regime.
Mind-blowing, isn't it?
Isn't it? It's crazy because AJ had 2 world championship reigns that both lasted over a year. Both times that he had the world title. Kevin Owens had the world title one time, and he lasted 9 months. And it could have gone longer had the Goldberg fiasco not happened and, whatever. Besides the point. I hate that for these guys. And if they're happy with their spot, great. It just makes it hard to take them seriously in a championship feud because I don't think they're going to win.
So basically, I think we're both kind of, tiptoeing around the fact that maybe as far as in Triple H's eyes or even the fans' eyes, whatever how you want to phrase it, they might be past their prime. Is that kind of what we're getting at here?
I think so.
Because, but just think though, if Vince was still in charge, AJ coming back as jacked as that man looks, he would have won the world title again.
Yep.
No doubt.
In that situation, there were 2 world titles for a reason, and AJ Styles would have went and got the other one if he wasn't dethroning Roman Reigns. He'd have went and got the other one. No doubt about it. That's why this 2 world championship thing blows my mind that Kevin Owens hasn't had another world title in 7 years, because there's been 2 of them the whole time. Go get the other one. You know, it just, I don't know.
And Bruce always says, well, they didn't need the world title. I think both of these guys could benefit from the world title again.
Absolutely.
I mean, you could sell tons of their merch. You could put them back at the top.
Yep.
Even if it's just for a couple months, they could have a nice little reign and then drop it back and, you know, see how they do from there on. You know, let them chase it again.
I agree.
I don't know, man.
I think once we get this heel Kevin Owens, it could be very interesting to see what happens. I would love to see, I'm not saying I would love to see Kevin beat Cody Rhodes, but I would love to see him going up against Gunther for the other world championship. That would be a fun match for sure. We'll talk about Gunther here in a minute. Let's talk about the Women's Tag Team Championship. Changed hands as we predicted. Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill defeating the Unholy Union, Alba Fire and Isla Dawn. Jared, don't want to get too much into this match. I think it was definitely the popcorn spot on the show. Didn't go as probably as they would like. I don't know, it didn't hit well for me. But do you think you mentioned it last week, you think putting the titles on them just helps their feud going into WrestleMania? Do you think it's because, not necessarily that they're building towards that feud, but that creative just didn't have anything for Jade and Bianca without the titles? I feel like they were just kind of there and not really doing anything.
Yeah, I still don't think I've watched this match all the way through, and I've kind of like watched a match here, watched a match there. Tess watched some of it with me, but she kind of fell asleep a couple times when I had it on, or I probably would have watched the women's match because she really likes Bianca. So I probably would have watched it, or may still watch it with Tess. But as far as just for me, I did not care about this match. They haven't done anything to make me care. Nope. So I don't think they have anything creatively. I think this time you hit the nail on the head, man.
I just wonder why they even took the titles off of them to begin with, because it's not like they did anything with Isla Dawn and Alba Fire in their championship reign anyway. Like, they won the titles at Clash at the Castle, and they may have defended them on a Raw or a SmackDown or whatever, but then they turn around their next pay-per-view match and then they lose them. It's like, it just did not make a lot of sense why they even took the titles from Jade and Bianca to begin with. Go ahead.
If I had to venture a guess, and I have nothing to base this on, I almost wonder if Triple H was thinking, okay, let's split them up and let's let not Bianca, what's the other
Jade
name?
Cargill.
I keep forgetting. Yep. Yes, Jade. And we'll let Jade start having some singles matches, and then maybe put Bianca over here and have some singles matches, and we'll bring them back together for a big feud. And then they probably watched Jade a little closer and thought, maybe we should stick with some tag team matches for a while. I swear, if I was a betting man, that's what I would say.
Well, I would not put any money down against that bet because you're probably right. But all that to say, let's go back to Bianca Belair for a minute, because I wrote something down in my notes that I want to get your take on, especially because your wife is a fan of Bianca. When she came out at this pay-per-view, she got no pop, no cheers, no nothing. It was just there. And it was like during the match, she had to beg the crowd to get behind her. Now, again, they just came off Cody and Kevin Owens. They probably went to the bathroom, and they're probably not all back in their seats yet. Okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But, Jared, let's look at the other side of this. Do you think that it's about time for a character change for Bianca Belair?
I've thought so for a while. Like, several times my mind has led me down the road of, what if she turned heel? What would that look like? And so I'm bored with her, man. Yeah. I mean, the women and probably I would imagine that she probably has more female fans than male fans, just because females like to watch females wrestling.
Yep.
More so than I think a lot of times the men like to watch the women wrestling. And maybe we're just used to it because that's all that we ever watched was men wrestling. But I think you could leave her character basically the same, and the women who watch, like my wife, when she watches, would still think Bianca's pretty cool just by, giving her a heel persona, but still letting her do a lot of the same moves and still having that flashy kind of presentation. So I don't think it would hurt her. I think it would help her, man.
I do too.
I swear I do.
All I'll say is that the SmackDown Women's Division has got to have something. Of course, on Friday Night SmackDown, we saw Bayley return, so that might give a little shot in the arm to the Women's Division. But, man, you look at Jade and Bianca, and then you look at the Unholy Union and maybe Naomi and the Women's Champion Nia Jax, and you're just like, man, I miss Charlotte and Becky so freaking much. Like, this Women's Division on SmackDown needs something.
Yes. Yep. I think the women's division, just on the whole, needs something. We need a new influx of female talent if we're not going to have the tried and true Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch there to kind of steer the wagon. I think it's time that they find some more female superstars and bring them up.
Yeah,
ready or not.
Yeah.
Jade's not ready. Ready or not, bring the rest of them up.
That's true. And we'll talk about Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan, who are both doing incredible work over on Monday Night Raw, but it's them two, and then it's sort of the rest, honestly. But let's talk about the match that happened before that. It was the strap match, the second match in the series, CM Punk capturing his bracelet and winning the match. Man, a really, really entertaining match. I want to bring this up about the match, because it was an old-fashioned strap match. It was really good. They beat the tar out of each other. It was fantastic. But if you're looking on your screen on YouTube, by the way, if you're not watching on the YouTube channel, please make sure you do that. Viewership is growing. We would really appreciate your support there. But on the YouTube channel, the video version, you see Jared CM Punk's gear there. And that gear that he wore at Bash in Berlin was the exact same gear that he wore at All In and Wembley Stadium for AEW 1 year ago.
When I was watching this dude, I was like, I know I've seen him wear that before. Didn't know where from, but yes, you are correct. I looked.
So, last weekend, not this past, so Bash in Berlin was on Saturday. The Sunday before that, of course, we talked about AEW All In Wembley. And Jack Perry just cannot let this real glass thing go. He calls out CM Punk in the middle of his match with Darby Allin with the real glass and everything. So do you think CM Punk said, okay, I'm going to wear this just because? Do you think that?
Oh, yeah. 100%, man. It was definitely taking a shot at AEW. Yeah.
Oh,
you could have had me. I could have still been there making you big money, but I'm better off over here. I think that was basically what he was saying.
Which is a fantastic point that you just involuntarily made, because it was 1 year ago today, September 2nd, as we record this podcast, that Tony Khan grew a set and he fired CM Punk 1 year ago today. And then just a few short months later, bada bing, he's back in WWE, and the rest is history. All right, so Jared, tonight we saw on Monday Night Raw Drew McIntyre attacking CM Punk. They're not done. We kind of figured that was going to happen. But, dude, Drew ripping the bracelet, breaking it, and then shoving the pieces down CM Punk's throat. Like, what are we doing, man? That was so wild.
I mean, that, just like how we started the show, man, that was old school. I mean, remember the $1 Million Man cramming $100 bills in people's mouth? Same concept, dude. I loved it.
It's so good. So obviously we're headed to a third match with these two in Hell in a Cell at Bad Blood. And again, it might be predictable. The story might just be right there in front of you, but daggum, Jared, it's entertaining.
I love it, man. That's probably my favorite thing. Now that Roman's back, I'm very interested in that.
Yep.
But if Roman hadn't come back, that hands down would have been the thing that I'm most interested in the entire WWE product.
I don't know, man. It's between that CM Punk storyline and this Liv Morgan, Dominic Mysterio, Rhea Ripley triangle thing. It's so good. Let's talk about that match before we get into the mixed tag match. Again, if you're watching on a YouTube channel, I implore you to do that. But look at this picture. Jared, this shot right here of the entrance of Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley is freaking incredible. Look how sick that looks.
It's awesome, man. It makes them look like the stars that they have become.
It absolutely does. And they were victorious against Dominic Mysterio and Liv Morgan in mixed tag team action. Man, they tried to throw everything at them. The Judgment Day showed up. This one was, in my opinion, exactly what it needed to be. It was fast-paced, seemingly no rules. It was a lot of fun. The crowd was absolutely just electric for this match. I loved it. I thought it was great.
Me too, man. It's just, who would have thought, looking back? I mean, there was always big hopes for Dominic Mysterio because he's Ray's son.
Yep.
Then he shows up, and you see him, and you're like, this guy ain't ever going to be nothing. And now, man, he has proved all of us wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, just like you said, he is one of the most entertaining aspects of the entire show.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole story around him, of course, all these people are playing their parts to perfection, which is something that seems like we keep saying over and over on this show.
Yep.
But it's true, man. And they keep just knocking it out of the park.
Yep. They really do. And we'll talk about that, a reason for that here in a few minutes. But yeah, I thought the match was just absolutely fantastic. But again, as we saw with Punk and with Drew, we saw an attack at the beginning of the show. They're clearly not done. We're probably headed towards Liv versus Rhea inside Hell in a Cell as well, which I think makes sense. I think there's a scenario you could stretch it all the way to WrestleMania, but I think I'd rather see Rhea versus Dom at WrestleMania. So let's get Rhea and Liv out the way, and let's keep it going that way. Let's talk about the main event, man. This hard-hitting back-and-forth affair. You can see it again on the YouTube screen, just how hard these two hit each other. Of course, I'm talking about Gunther and Randy Orton for the World Heavyweight Championship. Gunther coming out on top. It was good, man. It really was. They beat the tar out of each other. But part of me thought this was about 5 minutes too long. Like, I feel like if they would have ended it about 5 minutes earlier, I would have been more invested.
I didn't. I mean, maybe I could, next time I watch it back, because I'm sure I'll watch this again, maybe I'll keep that in mind. But that didn't enter my mind whenever I was watching it, man. It kept me captivated pretty much the entire way. And this was one that my wife Tess actually watched with me, and she loved it too. Like, I looked over a couple times because I thought she'd be asleep. Nope, eyes glued to the TV. And of course, I laughed that now she watches wrestling. But
well, I mean, I know she likes Gunther, but Carell was there, so she had to watch to support him.
Yes, I made sure that she remembered that Carell would in fact be there.
But man, this was a great. I said this last week. Randy was a perfect opponent for Gunther, and he was.
If Roman Reigns had been there, then the Island could have been there too. So go ahead,
man, just that would have had everything. Golly, would have been perfect storm for her. But man, Randy just put Gunther over. Yeah, dodge your bullets there. Randy just put Gunther over in a big way. Kicking out of the RKO was a huge spot. It really made Gunther, of course, the show of respect there at the end. Just a really great opponent for Gunther. And now as we're watching Monday Night Raw, looks like we're going forward with Sami Zayn knocking on Gunther's door one more time for a World Heavyweight Championship match. I'm like you. I'm like, come on. We got from Randy Orton to Sami Zayn. Come on.
Yeah. The only way that I'm going to buy Sami Zayn being anywhere near the world title picture ever again is if they revamp the bloodline, which of course, you know, they will, the original bloodline, and they bring Sami back. Then you can get him back in the main event picture. But right now, he's just dead in the water to me, man. Like, I don't care anything about his character.
I don't either. I really don't. But we hope that our viewers and our listeners care about our product. We hope that's why you're here. And if you are here on our YouTube channel, hit the thumbs up button. That would be very much appreciated. Hit the subscribe button. We are almost to 200 subscribers. Again, might not sound like a lot to everybody else, but it means a heck of a lot to us. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Jared, there are so many videos that we have posted previously that the viewership just keeps climbing and climbing and climbing. Do yourself a favor, go back and check out all of our playlists where we've sort of broken up a lot of our longer episodes into shorter videos. Check those out. Leave us some comments. Let us know what you think. We do our best to respond to each and every one of those. So make sure that you leave us a comment. We would very much appreciate that. And again, subscribe if you haven't already. I can't stress that enough. Jared, like 80% of our viewers on our YouTube channel are not subscribed. All you got to do is hit the button right down there. Hit the subscribe button.
Is it like a bell or something?
It's a bell. Yes.
What the hell? Use the bell.
You heard the man. You heard
Bobby
the man.
Heenan, WrestleMania. Hopper versus Bret Hart. I'll never forget it.
You heard the man. Set those notifications. That way you'll know each and every time we upload a new episode. We would appreciate that very much. All right, Jared. We got a couple more things in WWE to hit, and then some big news.
One thing.
Yes, go ahead.
One thing before we go on. Before we leave the Gunther aspect, what does it mean for his character that he shook Randy Orton's hand at the end, and that he's the one that proposed the handshake?
You know, that's a good question. Because I could have seen it if it was the other way around, that Randy, said that, hey, Gunther, you earn my respect, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Especially if he's the big bad heel. I mean, obviously they got Sami Zayn in here, and Sami can rile the crowd up, and it's easy to turn Gunther back heel. I don't know. I think it was more about Randy than it was Gunther. As they said on the broadcast, it was very much the passing of the torch. The future is now, yada, 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 that kind of thing. So I think it was more of that than anything. But I'll be interested to see if they say anything on commentary tonight or what Gunther said in his promo. Again, we have Raw on while we're recording, but we're not listening to it. So I'll be interested to go back and see if he said anything specifically about Randy. All right, a couple more WWE notes to hit, and then some big news came down last week that we have to talk about. Uncle Howdy, his in-ring debut happened after we stopped recording last week, so we do have to talk about it for a minute. He defeated Chad Gable in the main event of Monday Night Raw last week. Jared, I thought it was good. The Bray Wyatt gauntlet that he had on his hands made out of Bray's gear, that was a nice touch. But I really thought Uncle Howdy pandered too much to the crowd in this match. I thought it was a little too, hey, let's get behind me. It's just like, no, just go kill him and do that.
I think that right now, I don't know if you keep the mask or you ditch the mask. Everything else, though, keep the way it is as far as the presentation. But you have him go back and watch The Undertaker. And the way The Undertaker was around WrestleMania 7 time. I think that was whenever he dropped Jake on the outside on his head?
That was 7? WrestleMania 8. 7 was his
Snuka.
7 was his debut against Snuka. Yep.
Yes. So you have him watch the way that Taker used to be, and you have him basically do the exact same thing. Big dead guy walking towards you. You hit him, he keeps coming. Like a Michael Myers almost. I think that would serve him really, really good at this point.
Yeah, I think it needs to be a little tougher. I know we've seen the vulnerable side with some of these videos and the interviews, and we know it's Bo Dallas, and that's all well and good, but it needs to be a little tougher. It doesn't need to be as, hey, look at me, hey, let's blah, 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 whatever. It just needs to be a little tougher, I think. Man, this is an interesting one that we have to bring up. It's not something I ever thought that we would be talking about on this podcast. JBL on the indie scene. Now, JBL, over the last week or two, has made it a habit of showing up. First, he showed up at Arena Mexico at whatever the big show is for Mexico. I don't remember what it's called. Triple Mania or something like that. I think that's what it is. He shows
Yes.
up. He shows up at Triple Mania, and then he shows up at GCW, and then this past weekend he showed up at TNA. Jared, JBL on the Indies, not on my bingo card for 2024. Man, that's just wild.
Maybe that, he wants to go to the Indies so he can do some more drugs.
Okay.
If you've never seen something to wrestle with live, then you have no idea what I'm talking about. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to say, just finish the context for our viewers who might not know what the drugs chant is. Go ahead.
Yeah, so at Something to Wrestle with Live, JBL comes out, and I don't, maybe the man was sober as a judge, but it did not appear that way. And he began to get a chant of drugs going several times throughout the show, and the crowd actually participated. They were chanting drugs too.
There were plenty of times when JBL didn't even lead the chant. He just had to say something, and the chant just erupted.
Yeah, he did it like one time. I think he was telling like a story of, how drugs used to be rampant in WWF and WCW, NWA, ECW, all those things. And so I think he said something to the effect of telling the story, gets to the part where drugs were consumed, I guess. Did a drugs, and then throughout the rest of the show, everybody just kept chanting at him.
Yes. It's a fantastic time. That was the night before WrestleMania in New Orleans. That was our first WrestleMania. Man, what a time!
Best.
What a time to be alive. I know that your memory is a little foggy for some parts of that weekend. I remember it like it was yesterday, and it was like the best weekend ever. All right. Well, let's talk about the man who was in charge for that WrestleMania. It came down this week that Netflix is producing a documentary to air on September the 25th, so we don't have to wait too far to get it. Mr. McMahon. It's directed by Bill Simmons, who is part of the Ringer Network and worked for ESPN, and is also directed and executive produced by Chris Smith. You might not know that name, but he was the executive producer for Tiger King. So, everybody knows that show. So, those are the guys that are producing this documentary. Jared, you sent me this text last week, and we both, jaws on the floor, this documentary is actually happening. Before we talk about it, I want to let our viewers know, this is what we know about this documentary right now. I'm going to read a couple things, so bear with me. Put your listening ears on, ladies and gentlemen. The summary of this documentary says it will follow Vince's entire journey from transforming regional wrestling into a global phenomenon all the way up to the allegations that brought him down. There are 200 hours of interviews with Vince himself taped for this documentary. However, they were taped before he resigned from the WWE. Big caveat there. Also, they interviewed Vince's family members, business associates, wrestling legends. People they did not interview were the representatives of Janelle Grant, who is named in the lawsuit, and all of those things. They were not interviewed. This is a direct quote from Chris Smith, the executive director of the documentary. He says, "The goal is to pull back the curtain and reveal the true Vince, obscured beneath the persona he presented to the world." He continues and says, "The final product is a revealing documentary that we believe offers a rich and nuanced portrait of the man and the complex legacy he leaves behind." So, Jared, in reading all of that, what are your thoughts, man?
Dude, I'm very interested to, with the knowledge that we have now, to go and watch this expose or whatever on Vince, this documentary, and just see the way he talked about everything before people kind of came to the realization that he is what he is.
Yes.
That's the nicest way I know to put it.
Yeah. Because it says that the interviews with Vince were taped before his resignation. But if they're following all the way through the allegations, that would lead you to believe that some people were interviewed after the fact and that's going to show up after the fact, just not Vince. So it's seemingly going to be a tell-all situation, but I'm like you, man. That's the part of this documentary that I'm already having trouble getting behind, is the fact that you're trying to show us who Vince was, not on screen. I applaud you for that, but we know that he's probably lying in these interviews because there's these allegations that haven't come out yet all of this has already happened. So how much do you believe what he says, or do you just look at it all as a facade to begin with?
I don't know, dude. It's kind of him and Hulk Hogan. It's really difficult to, like, I would love to have the wrestling knowledge, not all the knowledge, but all the wrestling knowledge, everything that Vince experienced and the way things happened. Yeah. I mean, I'd buy book after book about it. The same way I would buy book after book about following Hogan to where I think it was AWA, and then he came to the WWF and WCW, and then back to WWE. Like, I'd buy book after book about it. But can you believe them?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's like Hogan takes credit for, everything under the sun with wrestling. And it's like, well, not exactly. And it's a shame that we're not getting the Hogan documentary or the biopic that we were supposed to get with Chris Hemsworth playing Hulk Hogan and all that. It's a shame that we're not going to get that.
We're not getting it?
No, we are not getting it. That went.
Wow.
Yeah, that got canceled. I know it was back and forth for a while, like they had pulled the plug and then it was back on, but evidently the plug has been pulled for good. So, very sad that we're not getting that, but I'm very interested in this Vince documentary about what people are going to say and who's going to say it. Like, that is a big deal because there's going to be, like, The Undertaker has been very public in saying that it's very hard for him to talk about Vince with everything that has come out because Vince did so many great things for him throughout his career. And there are so many guys. Shawn Michaels, Vince treated exceptionally well. The Undertaker made him a superstar. Hulk Hogan, all of these guys that Vince went to bat for and did everything for, that's the good. Then there's the bad on the other side, and somehow the bad is just awful, And
the thing that I would love to know, maybe we'll never know it, is how many people actually had knowledge, apparently, if these allegations are true,
right,
that Vince was that person that so many of us didn't know as well. Yeah. Were there people that really, there had to be some people. It's just, who were those people?
Right. Exactly. Hopefully we'll get some of those answers in this documentary. I don't know how much we'll get, but hopefully we'll get some of them. I'll tell you right now, listeners, viewers, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. If you're just listening on audio, make sure you're subscribed. If you're on the YouTube channel, make sure you're subscribed because we are going to do a bonus podcast on this documentary when it comes out. It comes out on September the 25th. You can expect a podcast probably the 26th or the 27th talking about this documentary. We'll be right here breaking everything down for you. But
I want to be on that podcast.
Well, we will make it happen. All that being said, though, Jared, we talked about Vince resigning and all these interviews happened before he resigned. He resigned in July 2022, just like 10 days before SummerSlam that we were at in Nashville. So he resigns a day that we never thought would happen in the wrestling business. We always thought Vince would die running WWE, and quite frankly, most people thought he would. We weren't the only ones. But that being said, we've seen one of the biggest boom periods in the world of wrestling, not just WWE, the world of wrestling, since Vince has been gone a little over 2 years. So I'm going to hit you with a tough question here. Who has benefited the most from Vince McMahon being gone?
Well, I mean, I would say hands down, Triple H has to be the first name that comes to mind, because now he has the job that I'm sure he has always wanted. I mean, who of us super fans, not even the ones that went on to become wrestlers, because those are few and far between.
Right.
But I feel like Triple H is one of these people. But just us super fans that have never been wrestlers, we would all love to be Vince McMahon.
Sure.
The highest. If you had a pyramid, he's at the main top. There is nothing above him. The wrestling god. It's not JBL. It was Vince McMahon.
Right.
And then Vince McMahon goes away. Triple H has now inherited that.
Yeah.
And so I think hands down, he would have to be the one that comes to my mind first. But I'm sure since you've asked me this question, you have an opinion. So I want to hear what you have to say.
I do have an opinion. I have a couple of, listen, I wrote down like 3 or 4 answers, and I was like, well, Jared's probably going to pick one of these, so I'll just take one of the other ones. But to your point,
did you guess Triple H?
Oh yeah, he's on there. To your point about Triple H, I don't know how many of our listeners or viewers or Jared listens to Matt Camp. Now, Matt Camp used to be on The Bump. He used to host a couple of things for WWE. He has since been released, and he has his own YouTube channel called The Wrestling Matt. Very interesting. Go check it out. He gives some nice behind-the-scenes stuff. I was listening to him talk about Vince's resignation in July 2022. And up until that point, when Triple H went out with his health issues, basically when Vince and Bruce and John Laurinaitis took control of NXT, made it 2.0, they took all power away from Triple H. So much so that at WrestleMania 38, when they had their company-wide meeting after that, so that was the one in Dallas where Triple H put his boots in the ring, Matt said that Triple H was relegated to just reading off the accomplishments for that WrestleMania at that meeting.
Wow.
He had no power whatsoever. So to your point, that was in April, May, of 2022. And then just 3 months later, he's the man. He's given all of that back and then some. So yes, you're arguing about Triple H benefiting the most. Here's one I'm going to throw at you.
The fans?
That's one. That is one. The fans. I mean, the product is incredible. Yes, ticket prices are a lot higher, but you're getting your money's worth with what you're paying for. So it's not like we go to WrestleMania and pay $400 or $500 and we walk out and we're like, well, that was trash. Like, why did we pay all that money? Versus now.
And we took those risks.
Absolutely we did. But now you pay $100, $150 to go to a Raw or SmackDown. You're going to be entertained for 2 to 3 hours. And you're going to walk out of there and it's going to be like, all right, I got my money's worth. Here's one that I'll throw at you. Michael Cole. He is doing, without Vince McMahon in his ear,
the best work ever.
the best work that he has ever done. Like I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I'm going to say it on the podcast anyway because it's my podcast, dang it, and this is where I can voice my opinion. I went to work the other day, and I told some guys, hey, I actually prefer Michael Cole's work over Jim Ross.
Ooh.
Hot take, but I do. Now, this is not a debate between Michael Cole and Jim Ross. I know by your reaction where you go. But just look at it.
You'd be surprised. I think it's neck and neck. And before, you remember how I felt the same way you did.
Sure.
We hated Michael Cole.
Yep.
But, dude, whenever Michael Cole's gone, I'm going to miss him as much or more than I missed Jim Ross.
Yep.
So I'm willing to say it's at least a tie. And you could have never convinced me of that 5 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael Cole is just, you can tell the way that he is able to communicate things and his personal feeling gets into it. And he and Pat McAfee are cracking jokes and they're doing all this other stuff. I'm not going to repeat the joke that happened on Bash in Berlin. If you didn't catch it, go back and listen to the introduction of the mixed tag team match. I texted you the joke, but just that kind of stuff. Vince McMahon would have ripped him a new one for that joke on air. Vince probably would have thought it was funny, but he would have ripped Michael Cole a new one. But now Cole's making jokes, and it's great. I feel like wrestling is more enjoyable, and part of that is commentary, and you can hear it in Michael Cole.
Well, I mean, just imagine how irritating it is whenever that you're talking to someone, and then let's say you have a phone up to your ear,
yep,
and somebody sitting in front of you continues talking as you're having to try to listen to this person on the phone. And that's basically what Michael Cole was going through. You know, he's trying to talk and listen to what the other guy's saying. And at the same time, it's like a bulldog probably just going off in his ear. It's hard to concentrate. And so I'm sure it was just, please God, help me just get through this and say and keep things straight.
Yep.
Not, hey, I can kind of, I can cut loose a little bit. There was no cutting loose, I'm sure.
Because not only is he listening to his color commentary partner, he is watching the product that we are watching, and he's trying to tell a story. He's trying to remember everything, not screw things up. All the while, Vince is screaming in his ear, and he's trying to listen to that, convey that, watch this. Commentary is not easy, ladies and gentlemen. I've done it on a very small scale, not anywhere near that level. It is not an easy thing. So I'm going to lean towards Michael Cole has benefited most from Vince McMahon being gone. But I think the fans, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The superstars, they're allowed time off now. The ship is being steered in a much smoother fashion. It's not.
Who was that you did commentary with at Mania weekend? Was it Byron Saxton?
No, it was Percy Watson.
Percy Watson. Okay.
He was the color commentator with Nigel McGuinness and Mauro Ranallo at NXT at the time. So, yes.
Okay.
I did a few minutes of that. A lot of fun. But in any event, we could sit here and name people that are benefiting from Vince being gone, but Jared, ultimately, the wrestling world, as we know it, whether any of us would have cared to admit it or not, myself included, we're all benefiting from Vince being gone. It's a new world, and it's absolutely crazy. I've got a new reinvigorated energy for it. You definitely do, and it's wild, man.
I love it, dude. And it's just like I was telling you a story about being at work and hearing somebody who doesn't, or at least I didn't know that they watched wrestling or used to watch wrestling, and somebody fell down and they called it a bump. And I was like, that came from wrestling. And so for years and years, I didn't hear people talking about wrestling, or if they did talk about wrestling, it was like it was back before the Attitude Era.
Yep.
That old fake stuff. But now, man, I mean, you can listen to people talk around you, and people were talking about Monday Night Raw, Brock Lesnar, what's he doing, Vince McMahon. They're using a lot of the slang that us wrestling fans know, and it's crazy, man, how much it's just all of a sudden another boom period. I think we're in it.
Yep. It's absolutely insane. It really is. All right. We've gone a little bit long on this show. We appreciate you guys hanging with us. Some good discussion. We hope you guys are digging what we're doing. Jared, as we get ready to close up shop here, this coming weekend is AEW All Out live from Chicago this Saturday, live on pay-per-view, 8 Eastern. Let me run through some of the matches real quick. We're not going to dive too deep into previewing this, but do want to acknowledge that it is a big show for AEW. You got Bryan Danielson defending against Jack Perry, the World Heavyweight Championship. Mercedes Moné against Shida for the TBS Championship. Will Ospreay against Pac for the International Championship. Swerve Strickland, Hangman Page in a cage match. Willow Nightingale, Chris Statlander in a Chicago street fight. MJF versus Daniel Garcia. And then we are recording before Dynamite this week, so I'm sure more matches will be announced. Jared, you watched most of All In. Is there anything you're looking forward to about All Out? Are you going to watch it? What are your thoughts?
I'm probably not going to watch it. It kind of just seemed like a great card kind of came together. And where is All Out? Is it
Chicago
International?
No, it's Chicago.
So another reason why I probably won't be watching this next one. I watched it because they had a pretty good card, and then it was going to be an international crowd.
Yep.
And so that's not really the case. I don't feel like as much with All Out.
Yeah.
The Daniel Bryan match or Bryan Danielson, whichever one he is going by, it's just, I don't find it that compelling. And that was one of the big reasons why I bought the pay-per-view last time.
Right.
So
I think if I have to pick something out on this card, again, I'm like you. I don't watch the shows weekly, so I can't say there's no build. There's probably some build, but nothing is sticking out to me. But if I have to pick one, I think Swerve and Hangman will beat the absolute snot out of each other inside of a steel cage.
Yes.
So if you're a blood and guts and gore fan,
there will be blood.
There will be blood, guts, gore, staples, fire, real glass. Who knows what there's going to be in this match. But man, I think that's the show. Let's put a bow on this show. Appreciate you guys being with us. Make sure you're subscribed again wherever you find your podcast and on our YouTube channel. 80% of our viewers are not subscribed. Do not be one of those 80%. Let's get that number down. Let's get the subscriber viewer number up. Again, viewership is growing up. Yeah, use the bell. Use the bell. Because Bobby Heenan said so.
That's right.
we would appreciate it very much, guys. We're trying to grow this YouTube channel, and you guys are responding, but keep responding. Tell a friend. We would appreciate it. So much so that if you guys keep the viewership going, Jared, we might sneak a YouTube exclusive show on them in the next coming weeks. Don't tell anybody.
Your secret is safe with me, man.
All right. Make sure you're following us on social media at SQ_radio is where you can find the show. We would appreciate that very, very much. New episodes dropping every Monday after Raw. We're going to change this little banner down here. We're going to start dropping them as soon as we finish recording them. We're going to get them uploaded. It seems like that this Raw reaction crowd helps a little bit with our viewership, so we're going to drop it immediately as soon as we get done recording. Jared, man, anything you want to... Let me try that one more time. Anything else? Anything else you want to add, man? It's been a fun show. I appreciate all the good conversation. It's been great.
No, man, I've had fun. And I think that's what wrestling is about. And I think that now with Triple H at the helm, that we're going to have a lot of fun as wrestling fans. And like I said, man, that's what we've all hoped for years and years, is that level of fun that we got from back in like the Golden era and then the Attitude era, the Monday Night Wars. I think it's back, dude. I'm excited again. And
who would have thunk that we could have gotten it without Vince McMahon? It's a wild time. Yeah, I know. You just knew it all, and I was the doubter. I'll admit it. It's fine. The whole podcasting show knows what's up. For Mr. Jared Justice, my name is Chris Belcher. Thank you for hanging out with us on this edition of Squared Circle Radio. We will catch you guys down the road.